Hello everyone. Today is a special day because I'll be making a tier list video. Now this is obviously going to be one of my more controversial videos because it won't be based on objective facts as much as they normally are, but I'll be basing it more on my own personal opinion and also a lot of things and trends that I see a lot in the Monotype ladder. So, well, besides the ladder, also MPL performances and top player opinions. So without further ado, let's get on with it. So as you can see here, I have all 18 types here, and before we go on, I just want to say that I feel like this metagame is definitely a little bit not good to play, but type-wise, I feel like there's a lot of variety. It's kind of similar to Sun and Moon in that regard. It's definitely still got like some really strong types, but then again, Sun and Moon also had really strong types. I mean, Fairy, Water, Psychic, those were really dominant types, but like the metagame was still relatively balanced. And almost every type was viable. I wouldn't say this generation is exactly the same because there's definitely some types that just struggle a lot, as we'll get into. But I feel like this metagame isn't nearly as bad variety wise. To play it is another story, but variety wise with the types, I feel like this metagame is okay. Not the best, but it's okay. Um, Without further ado, let's get on with who I think the worst types in the game are. So we're gonna go from I think we're gonna go from in order from the types. So we're gonna start with Bug and end with Water. And with Bug, I feel like Bug is a B rank type. So Bug is in an interesting place because like it's sort of good as a C team type because like it's got some of the best C team Pokemon in the game. Like Volcarona completely destroys Steel. Ribombee can absolutely eviscerate Dragon. Even though Ribombee isn't that common anymore, but back when it was good, it was disgusting against Dragon. It was kind of criminal. You also have Scizor now, who completely eviscerates Rock, Fairy, anything else Steel is weak to, basically. Then you also have Galvantula, who can help a lot against water and stuff. Like, it's crazy how many C Team Pokemon this type has. The only problem is that while it has all these great Pokemon, it has some of the best hazards in the game with rocks and webs. It doesn't. It suffers a little bit with how little like it's got offensive presence for sure. It does have offensive presence, but it doesn't have a lot of good pivots, and it can't run bounce very well, and it's also doesn't have a lot of resistances. So if you're not like completely running over the entire type, you're pretty much sacking a Pokemon for the most part because a lot of your Pokemon are extremely frail, and you don't run hazard removal, so you're basically running HO all the time. And another problem is that it's also pretty weak to Rapid Spin because it doesn't really have a good Ghost type. Because you do have Shedinja, and Shed does have a heavy duty boots, which helps out a lot, but it's just not that consistent of a spin blocker, especially because of Sandstorm. You also got Toxic running around, and it's pretty inconsistent. And even as a spin blocker, it's just not that good. Not that good on Bug, but and also besides that, it just doesn't have a good offensive presence at all. It just doesn't really do anything. So with that aside, I think Bug is definitely one of the strongest C team types in the game, but as a general threat of a type, I feel like it's not that good. It's definitely an anti-meta type, I would say. Kind of similar to Grass and Sun and Moon, to be honest with you. But yeah, it's between B or C for me here. It's very close, but I think I'm gonna give it a little bit of an edge and say it's B because it is pretty solid. It's got some pretty solid Pokemon, but it does have the problems of being completely run over by superior offensive types like Rain, sometimes even Fighting, certain variants of Steel, some variants of HO Dark. Like, it can get run over very easily, especially by priority and stuff like that. So I definitely feel like it can get run over, and it can get walled by certain types as well. But in general, the type is pretty solid. It has very solid Pokemon. So yeah, we'll leave it at B for now. Might change it later on. But yeah, pretty solid. So let's see. Dark. Dark is also in an interesting spot. So I would initially rank it A, because it's got access to Urshifu now. It's also got access to, because now it can run two viable archetypes, which is HO and not balance, bulky offense with Tyranitar and Mandibuzz. And both of these archetypes are pretty good, and Dark in general is pretty solid. The only problem is that it's weak to a lot of the top types. So like, it's weak against water, and it's kind of weak against fairy right now. And it's also kind of not that good against electric. At least right now it isn't. But yeah, it kind of suffers in like a few key MUs. And that's pretty much the main thing that's keeping it from being great. Um, I don't. I wouldn't want to rank it in the same tier as Bug, because I feel like Bug is like more of an anti-meta type, while Dark is just a solid type in general. So I'm really conflicted about where to put this type in particular, because I feel like ranking it with Bug would just not be justified. But I feel like Bug is fine where it is. So I don't know. But I would definitely put it above Bug. It's definitely better than Bug. It's way more consistent than Bug, thanks to your Shifu and its multiple archetypes. We've also got, if I'm not wrong, we might have a few performances with it in MPL, if I'm not mistaken. Let me see if I can find any. Alright, so it's, yeah, here we go. We have one, but it's by Salbab, and if you know anything about MPL, Salbab is the most inconsistent player the game has to offer. So yeah, and he didn't even win that match anyway, so we're probably not going to look at it. Well, we'll take a look at it just to see like what Dark runs. But yeah, he ran the HO archetype with a Crocodile, and as you can see here, it's just, it's solid, but it still just loses to like a lot of common types. So I guess I might just bump it down to B a little bit, because like, it shouldn't be losing to Psychic, I feel. It shouldn't be losing to Psychic, but because Psychic has like good mons like Hatterene and also Gardevoir in this generation, and it did get a lot of good decent buffs, like Weavile's getting triple axle was nice. Crocodile allowing HO is great. It got decent buffs, but it just isn't as dominant as it should be. It was definitely more dominant before DLC patch, but I think now it's a little bit weaker. So I think I would probably move it down. Probably move it down to B. Like I said, I would definitely say it's better than Bug, but I think in terms of overall effectiveness in the metagame, I think they're around the same level, because they both have very glaring flaws. Very, very glaring flaws. Next up we got Dragon. So Dragon's definitely also B tier type. Because Dragon used to be really, really good before, back when it had Cure and Black, but then that got banned. And as a result, Dragon's viability kinda suffered, because now it isn't able to just like run over certain types with ease. Now it actually has to really work hard to actually get an opening at all. And also it just really struggles against certain types as well, like Fairy, Psychic. It does decently against like stuff like Water, and it can do well against Electric, but it still mainly suffers a lot. And it actually, I'm not even sure if it got MPL usage yet. We'll just take a look at it again. Yeah, there was a replay with a Dragon, with the current, one of the current best players, flossed over, but I remember this replay. So in this replay, basically Floss loses because Dragon becomes unable to break, because he isn't able to break Ferrothorn properly, and it ends up being a huge threat to his team. So, and because Fernand played extremely smart with that, and it was able to block his fire spam a lot, it just allowed him to completely tear apart Flossed Over's team. There's also a couple of misplays and stuff, but yeah, in general, I don't think Dragon is like super, super top tier. It used to be really, really good, but now it just doesn't feel as potent as it once was without Cure and Black. and especially with the new mons that came out in this DLC patch, it's definitely going to get run over a little bit more. So yeah, Dragon is probably in the same rank as Dark. It's not as it's more consistent than Dark and Bug, I feel, but it's just still really underwhelming compared to some of the other topper tier types. Um, Next we got Electric. Electric definitely was one of the better types. Is definitely one of the better types now. It definitely got huge buffs thanks to Rising Voltage and Raichu Lola being even more ridiculous than before. It didn't get that many good Pokemon, but Rising Voltage was more than enough to make it extremely good. So, as you all know, Terrain Extender is still legal in this generation. So, what that means is basically, unlike in Gen 7, Raichu Lola can have up to 7 turns of electric terrain where it can basically just outspeed everything and hit really hard with its electric stab. And now with Rising Voltage, it's even more ridiculously strong because it does 140 base power to grounded opponents. Uh, and that's before stab and before electric terrain boosts. So, yeah, that's a ridiculous amount of damage that Raichu can do with just one move, and it's still got decent coverage options in Grassy Knot, Psychic, and Focus Blast. So yeah, don't get me wrong, Raichu literally carries this type at the moment. If you want my honest opinion, it really does carry this type. I feel like there's no reason you shouldn't be running that Mon and Electric Terrain because it's one of the main things, one of the scariest things to deal with in a metagame right now. Like that Mon can completely shut down teams, like completely. As a late game sweeper, it's disgusting. There's nothing some types can do about it. Like Ice, if you get rid of Hail from Ice, Raichu just completely sweeps the team. Like there's nothing you can do about it at all. Like you can try to do priority, but it just won't work. And Rising Voltage will just sweep all of your Pokemon. So yeah, Electric. Despite how ridiculous Raichu is, it's still got weaknesses. It's still weak to priority. It can still get gimped by other terrains, such as Psychic Terrain and Grassy Terrain from Rillaboom and such. So it's still weak to other terrain teams, like Grass, Psychic, Normal as well. Aside from that, I think Electric definitely does have some potentially really good matchups. It has a lot of good matchups, obviously, thanks to Raichu, but it can still get beaten out by other strong offensive types. And also, it's still got its same weaknesses, and like Steel, having Ferrothorn, Grass is obviously a really big problem. You also got Trick Room types, like Fairy, Psychic, Ghost to an extent, I guess. Um, yeah, it can do really well though, and I feel like it's definitely more solid than these other types. So I'll say Electric is definitely A. Mainly Raichu Lola driving up that usage right now, but I think Webs plus Raichu Lola, and also the other strong Pokemon like don't let's not forget that Zeraora is also on the type and extremely good. Uh, it's also got like plenty of other Pokemon too. Pincursion being actually a decent setter now that Rising Voltage is like a move he can use. We also have not Luxray, but Galvantula obviously can use Rising Voltage too. Like just a lot of Pokemon in general on Electric got buffed by this great change that they added. So yeah, Electric definitely one of the better types, one of the biggest types you should watch out for and prep for. If you want my honest opinion, it's not as common on the ladder I found, but it's definitely one of the biggest threats in my opinion. Next up we have Fairy. Fairy is in an interesting spot, so I'm gonna put it up to A tier right now because it's definitely up here. I wouldn't say it's S tier though. I feel like some people are thinking it's one of the best types in the game now, but I don't feel like that's the case. It's definitely extremely solid though. I mean, Klefki and Azumarill coming back is just like very good. for a type. You literally just can do belly drum sweeps with the Azumarill. The metagame literally has to fold to Azumarill again. It's not quite as potent as it was last gen, thanks to Z-moves being gone, but it still can run belly drum and completely run over the unprepared team. So your walls still have to like try and speed creep it, and just because of that effect alone, you should probably, this type is definitely threatening. Azumarill, and even without Azumarill, you still got threatening Pokemon like Hattering with screens. That's scary. That's extremely scary. Uh, Hattering with screens and its multiple sets that it can run. You also got, well, you had Magearna, but now that Pokemon is gone. Thank goodness. Uh, you also have Grimmsnarl, obviously, basically blocking Prankster, hitting opposing Psychic types, and also just being a decent Pokemon in general. You have a lot of solid Pokemon that you have access to. And I feel like it would be a crime to say that this type definitely shouldn't be on top of your threat list, because it's definitely one of the most dangerous types at the moment. So let's just take a look at like to see like what Fairy looks like in this generation. So we have a game. We haven't seen Fairy win, I don't think, a tournament match yet. There was a mirror though, so we can just look at the mirror and like see. Oh, whoops, that's not the wrong one. That's the wrong one. We want this one. But yeah, you can see like Mimikyu. I completely forgot about that Pokemon. Yeah, Mimikyu is also a really big threat to Psychic, and it's just a good blanket check to a lot of other types as well. You also have Scream's Togekiss, and also Clefable is definitely going to be on the rise thanks to Klefki coming back and basically enabling it to run its Babiri sets again, so that I can check steel types, especially Scizor. Because Scizor definitely was a neutering thing about this type, but now that it has Klefki again, it's not as bad as it was before. And you can always run Babiri Clefable, and Babiri Togekiss if you want to like try and avoid getting destroyed by that. But yeah, the type as a whole is just pretty decent and very, very potent. It's definitely a lot more consistent than most of the other types in the game. It's still got its weaknesses though, like obviously it gets like completely spat on by more offensive types that can deal with its screens. It's the same issue it had last gen, although it's made even worse now that it doesn't have the Tapus, where it can get easily run over by really strong offensive types. Like Fire is obviously an obvious example thanks to Cinderace and Sun Spam. I mean, back before it even got Azumarill, Fairy just didn't have a fire resist, period. So you could literally just go Torkoal, possibly even sack it, go into Cinderace, and basically just spam Pyro Ball, and you just collect kills against Fairy easily. If you break Mimikyu's Disguise, that's even better. But yeah, essentially you just completely destroyed this type by spamming like a move that it just didn't have a resist to. Klefki tries to alleviate this issue, but I still think it's going to be the same problem that persists for the rest of the generation, until it gets like a bunch of its better offensive Pokemon back. Because, as you know, Megas aren't coming back, or as far as I know, won't be coming back. So Diancie won't be here to resist fire moves at all, and to also be a huge threat to fire. The biggest threat to fire right now is Azumarill, and it's still going to have like a pretty hard time setting up. And its stab is going to be weakened thanks to Sun, and prominence of Incineroar also doesn't help. So I definitely feel like Fairy still struggles as a type. It definitely does have its weaknesses, but Azumarill and other offensive Pokemon really, really help this type become like a really big threat. That's why you saw the mirror of it in one of the generations before. So because of that, it's still an A rank type and should always be considered on your threat list as far as I'm concerned. Next, we have my main type, fighting. Fighting definitely feels a lot better now, thanks to Urshifu. It's a really tough call between B and C, but I feel like C is the most fitting spot for it, and I'll explain why. So, fighting has historically been, well, ever since Gen 7, it's just been really, really bad because of a few things: lack of priority, a lack of really threatening, well, not even a lack of threatening Pokemon, it's just a lack of diversity in threats. Like, it just lacks a lot of the scary offensive pressure it should have in order to work as a type. And this gen kind of solved some of it. It got rid of some of its bigger threats, like Latios is completely gone, so it doesn't get completely wiped by that type, by that mon. But also this gen introduced Urshifu, which solved quite a few fighting's problems, because at the moment fighting only has like Lucario as very good priority, and maybe even Hitmontop if you run that. But Urshifu has Urshifu Dark specifically has access to priority stab Sucker Punch, is immune to Psychic, and is also decently fast. So it basically is the perfect Pokemon for fighting, and should have technically been the thing that drove it from being an awful type to an actual decent type. Problem with that is that while fighting also got buffed, everything else did as well. Rainwater now has Hurricane. Kingdra, which basically completely wipes the floor with this type. Even without Hurricane, now can just run Hydro Pump and just completely sweep the team with it, because we don't have a water resist at the moment. So yeah, our water resist is Keldeo, and Keldeo isn't exactly going to threaten to Oko Kingdra, or at least put it to sleep like Breloom could. So that's the main problem with that right now. And also, the prominence of Fairy and Klefki coming back doesn't help it either. Obviously, it still has its very good benefits, but it just lost so much because Mega Gallade doesn't exist anymore, and regular Glade just doesn't cut it, so it gets completely destroyed uh, by poison right now. If you don't play your Shifu properly, that is. But Galarian Weezing can literally just come in sometimes and just completely destroy your team with like very little effort, thanks to Strange Steam. Normal can also completely run you over thanks to Scarf and DD, and it literally stops your Shifu from being able to stop it in the first place unless it's running Scarf. And yeah, those are your main problems with fighting. It just gets completely cucked by certain playstyles, like very, very hard. That being said, it is still threatening, and I do feel like it definitely is way better than it was before, but I just cannot say that it's on the same level as consistency as Bug, Dark, and Dragon. It still gets completely swept over, and it just doesn't. It just cannot keep up with the metagame right now. Your Shifu helps a ton. Don't get me wrong. I'm still gonna use the type personally, but it's just not that good. It's not that good. I think getting back Heracross and other stuff is definitely very helpful to the type, but it's just not going to be enough to help it get back to where it needs to be. So for now, I think fighting definitely is a C tier type, but it can get better, and it might get better as the metagame progresses, because a lot of people don't use fighting right now, so there might be even more tech that fighting can run, maybe more Urshifu sets that we can run, who knows, but for now, fighting is just kind of meh right now. Fire definitely is better than fighting right now. Uh, Fire gets run over by quite a few types, definitely, but it also runs over quite a few types. Um, it actually has the same issue as fighting, where it just doesn't really have a lot of consistency. So I think putting it in C would definitely be a lot more fitting. But yeah, Cinderace completely destroys a few types on its own. Cinderace completely destroys a few types on its own. It's also gotten quite a bit of NPL usage, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah, we got the Fire versus Water game with Havens and Kevin Elf. And then we also have two fire games right here, Psychic versus Fire and Normal versus Fire. So you can even see here, like, Normal cannot really do much about this. Like, this offensively is just really hard to deal with. Like, even if you had Thick Fat Snorlax, like, you get high jump kicked by Cinderace, you might get superpowered by Darmanitan. And also, Scarf Charizard can just completely destroy your entire team if you don't have a mon faster than it. Like, if you don't have fire resist in this metagame, fire will run over you. And I feel like that's really strong. That's incredibly strong. So fire is one of those scary types. It's definitely a threatening type, for sure. You should definitely consider it on your team. And I feel like that might be enough to warrant it being a higher rank than fighting, because it's very scary. When it doesn't have an unfavorable matchup, it's very scary. But because it has quite a few matchups where it does poorly in, like Dragon, Water, obviously. Dragon and Water are very bad matchups. Sometimes Fairy, if they play Azumarill properly. There are some MUs where it just won't do that well. Ghost... Ghost can do fine, because Cinderace has Sucker Punch and Stab on it as well, so... But Ground is also another bad matchup for you. But Ground isn't really that good right now. We'll talk about that type later. But yeah, I feel like it's dependent. Fire is completely dependent on matchup, and because of that, I definitely feel like it's definitely worth a B rank. It's definitely not C rank at all. Don't know why I thought that. But yeah, Fire completely good. It just completely run over types. Like, it's ridiculous how strong this type can be if it gets the right matchup. So it's definitely on the same tier as Bug, for sure. It doesn't have any of those struggling inconsistencies. It doesn't lose to types it should beat. It's really solid, in my opinion. Definitely way better than it was last gen, because last gen it was arguably one of the worst types in the game. So yeah, Fire is in a very good place right now. Fire mains rejoice. Alright, but unfortunately, if you're a flying main, now probably isn't the best time to be rejoicing. I don't really think I need to cover why flying is really bad in this generation if you actually played this gen, but for those of you who haven't, flying doesn't have an electric immunity outside of Emolga, and Emolga is a terrible Pokemon. So the fact that you basically are completely down an electric immunity is really bad. It's like Steel not having a fire immunity, even though Steel somehow is still good. But flying just cannot do that well because electric moves are everywhere. Electric itself is good type. And also just, while it does have good offensive mons, and it has one good notable replay against Bug from one of the top mono SS players, Conflux, and he did talk to me about this type before I made this tier list, but let me see where his replay is. But essentially, in this replay, yeah. So in this replay, he kind of utilizes like all the good aspects about flying, because like it has good defensive Pokemon in Skarmory, Mandibuzz, Mantine. Like, these three Pokemon are extremely fat, but they all share a common weakness in electricity. Like, Galvantula should, in theory, destroy this type, but Charizard is a big threat to him, and that's why you don't really use it that often. And also, it still does have a neutrality, but the neutrality has to be run defensively in order to be good, and I don't feel like Noivern is exactly the pinnacle of defensive flying Pokemon, but it's definitely decent. So yeah, flying can work in this metagame, and it just speaks to how good the metagame is competitively with for all the types. But I definitely do not think, consistency wise, it is not that good. I do not think it is that good as of a type. It has the mons to do work, but as a consistent cohesive type that you should be worrying about, it should not be on the top of your threat list, because most of the Pokemon that are problematic on flying are problematic to your team on other types as well. Like Corviknight is problematic for Steel, and you should be worried about Steel. Charizard, you should be worried about on Fire regardless. If you're worried about like half the Pokemon that are on Flying, you're worried about them on types that they are way, way better on. With the exception of Mantine, because I don't think Mantine is that good on water right now. But with that out of the way, yeah, flying is just, it's going to be prepped against, and it should be, and unless it gets like that one little MU like bug or like fighting, where it can be really good, or even Steel, because I think it does beat Steel thanks to Charizard. But with those one few MUs, it's kind of like Ice last gen, where it has those few MUs where it does really good, but then most of the other MUs it's just really trash, and it can't keep up. But yeah, flying definitely isn't horrible, but it's definitely not as good as the rest of these types. It's definitely one of the worst types, but you can win with it. I'm not saying you can't win with it. It's just going to be very, very difficult. And the point of this tier list is to like show like the threat list of types to give you an idea of what's the most threatening in this metagame, and what you should be watching out for, and what you might not want to over prep for. But yeah, next we got Ghost. Ghost is actually still really good. Ghost is definitely still one of the better types this game. Way better than it was last gen, obviously. Thanks to Dragapult. Also, Chandelure not being garbage this gen is pretty nice. We also have quite a few other Pokemon that help you succeed as well. Let me head into my team builder real quick. But yeah, you got quite a few things that help you. So you got Mimikyu, you got scary ass Poltergeist. You also got Poltergeist as a physical stat move, even though only like 2 Pokemon on the type run it, like Marowak and Golurk. But besides that, you still got like really solid Pokemon, and Aegislash isn't broken anymore, so you still got that Pokemon that can help you a lot in certain matchups. It's a very good HO type, and it's definitely one of the more solid types in the metagame right now. It's also still really scary, because like Alola Marowak has like almost no switch-ins in this generation, so like it can just completely like remove one of the walls on your team. Like Mandibuzz doesn't switch into it if it has Flare Blitz. That is, if it doesn't have Flare Blitz, it probably does switch in. But regardless, Marowak, Dragapult, Gengar, Mimikyu, the threat list is just immense, and the amount of positive matchups it has, like against Steel, for example, thanks to Chandelure. It also has good matchups against Psychic, Fairy, thanks to Gengar. It's got good matchups against Rock, Ground, Water, thanks to Poltergeist. Yeah, it's just got a bunch of good matchups. Very good matchup spread. And because of those good matchups and just the general threat, the amount of threatening stuff that's on this type, like, it's definitely one of the types you should worry about when you're creating a team. So, definitely on top of the threat list for sure. Not one of the best types in the game, because it's got its weaknesses, especially because it gets overpowered by, like, strong priority, like Urshifu's, Sucker Punch or Aqua Jet, Surging Strikes. A bunch of really strong, fast Pokemon can really easily make this type bad. So, like, weather teams, for example, terrain teams, electric, for example. yeah, it can get run over. It really can get run over, but it's still really, really consistent and solid. And because of the few Pokemon that it does have that are really good, it just takes it over the edge from being a B rank type. So yeah, Ghost is pretty good right now. Now we move on to Grass. Grass is definitely a B tier type, I feel. It's I think it's a little bit better, consistency wise. I think it's a little bit better than it was last gen. Because last gen it was pretty alright, but I think this gen it's a lot more solid thanks to Appleton, who's basically your Mega Venusaur replacement for all intents and purposes. The only thing that Appleton doesn't have is HP Fire and Sludge Bomb, and those are pretty big things to be missing. I will not lie; those are pretty big things to be missing. But it still does its own thing really well, and its access to recover and not having to be worried about synthesis being stopped in like rain or sandstorm is really nice. Also, it's just way fatter than Mega Venusaur ever was. Because while Mega Venusaur was pretty fat and had thick fat, Appleton is a literal resist because it has both thick fat and the Dragon Grass typing, neutralizing the fire. So it's really good. Appleton is definitely one of the reasons why I think Grass is really good right now. It also has quite a bit of C-Team potential against the top types like Water, Fairy. It's pretty decent. It has a pretty decent matchup against Electric right now. It can beat Normal pretty well too. Psychic, it has a pretty decent-ish matchup if you use like Decidueye, even though I don't think a lot of people use Decidueye right now, but the option is still there. But yeah, Grass has a lot of variety, and Sungrass is also really good and really oppressive. I feel like Bounce Grass is also still good right now, thanks to Grassy Surge, Rillaboom, basically allowing that archetype to work a little bit more, because now you have a better offensive Pokemon that isn't reliant on Grass. Isn't reliant on Sun. And I feel like having that is definitely good, but like pairing that with Sun is also really good, so I can see why more people would use Sun. Also, Sun completely demolishes Steel, so there's that. But yeah, Sun can just completely destroy certain types. It's definitely one of the most threatening versions of Grass, and Venusaur is like still scary because of that. But yeah, besides being able to run both Sun and that, you would think it would be a top level threat, but it's not. And that's mainly because while it still is really dangerous, don't get me wrong, it still suffers from the same problems Grass did last gen, which was it has a little bit too much passivity, and even though it has really good, solid offensive Pokemon, it gets run over by other archetypes as well, like not necessarily Rain, but I think Terrain teams definitely hurt it a little bit more. It beats Electric a little bit better, but it still suffers against like other types, like suffers against Poison, for example, suffers against Ice quite a bit actually. Hurricane Kingdra doesn't help matters at all either, and Normal obviously has quite a few things that beat it, but yeah, this type definitely pretty solid, but it's not top. It's not a top threat. It's not a top threat. It's still something you should be worried about though. Like if you're worried that your team might get soloed by Grass, I would definitely say you should worry about it. So yeah, Grass definitely a type you should worry about. Uh, but a type you definitely should worry about is Ground. Ground. Ground being better than flying feels like an insult to flying, because flying definitely does work, but ground is just. On paper, ground should be a pretty decent type. It has sand plus Excadrill, which is a really good combination for obvious reasons, and it also has access to quite a few dangerous Pokemon. Like let's take a look at it real quick. Because I can't remember everything off the top of my head. But yeah, we got Seismitoad, obviously. Rhyperior, Diggersby is actually not that bad this generation. Mamoswine is pretty good. Got Gastrodon as well, but like see these mons, like they're all good mons individually, but like as a type, ground just doesn't work that well, and you can see that in the MPO replays too. Like you barely see ground getting brought at all because like the overall consistency of the type is just not there. I mean, Zugu used it because he loves his ground team a lot, obviously, and it can do work. Because, like I said, any type can do work in this game, but it's just not that good. It's really not that good, and it's hard to describe why it's good. Because on paper, everything should be fine, but in practice, you find that ground just like really suffers at like getting in on certain types and just keeping being consistent against like more threatening offensive types like grass, bug, dark, and it just like it gets beaten out by quite a bit of stuff. Like obviously, it still has top tier good matchups. Like it beats Fairy with Excadrill and such, but it also beats Electric very obviously. But it's just really not consistent. It's inconsistent, and because of its lack of consistency, it's just not that good. And its Pokemon also just don't mesh very well together. Because, like, you got these really threatening breakers in Diggersby, Rhyperior, and such, but then they just don't really pivot well into each other. And the entire type just feels like you're, like, trying to hard read your opponent the entire time. And on a more offensive-based team, that's not exactly good. So yeah, I would say ground is definitely not one of the best types in the metagame right now. It's definitely very akin to flying, where you can do work with it, but it's just not. It's not that overpowering. I mean, Sand Excadrill, you're still going to want to worry about Excadrill, period, because of if you're like electric, for example, you obviously don't want to get swept by Sand Excadrill. That's just a thing that's always been a thing. It doesn't matter how viable ground is, you don't want to get swept by that. So you're always going to run a Balloon Mon to help out with that. But yeah, um, besides Excadrill being a huge threat and Diggersby obviously also being a huge threat, there's not that much on ground that really like scares you. There's not that much that really like makes you stand on your toes and just be like, ooh, I gotta worry about those Pokemon. Like it's not that scary. It only has like two very scary Pokemon, and those can be easily dealt with like walls like Ferrothorn, Toxapex to an extent. You also got other offensive archetypes that just beat them out, like Rain, Psychic Terrain, Psychic. You also got Normal with its nonsense, Hail with Ice. Poison, even to an extent, can beat it thanks to Vileplume. Like, it's actually not that good, and it's pretty embarrassing. Steel also can completely 6-0 this type because of Corviknight, and if you basically don't run Rhyperior, you're going to lose to it. Like, Metronome Flagon does not work. It does not work, and it will never work because of Corviknight always stalling it out, and it's always specially defensive, so it's never going to take that much from it. Even if you use Specs Flygon, it still won't work because pressure will just eliminate all uses of Fire Blast. Even if you get a burn, you'll run out of uses before you can actually do anything. So in practice, you'll never actually win if you just use that Mon as your Corviknight check. But yeah, ground is just not in a good place right now. It could be a lot better, and it can also do some work, but it's just not the best right now, and it can't even run Sandless viably. So yeah, it's pretty linear and not even good at the one thing it does, which is offensively threaten a lot of things with Sand. It really needs a special attacker, a special wall breaker, and also just a couple of better, faster Mons, because it's pretty slow as a type, so it gets outsped by a lot. And yeah, it's just really weak, really, really weak, which is unfortunate. Such a fall from grace. We got Ice now. Ice, I actually feel, is not that good. It's gotten a little bit better, but and used to be really good beforehand, but I feel like the introduction of Sizor and a bunch of types getting really, really buffed kind of made Ice a lot worse, because Ice did not get anything. Besides Triple Axle, which is kind of okay on some of the mons that get it. Like, it's good on Sandslash and it's good on Weavile, but besides that, that change wasn't enough to keep Ice up with like the rest of the types. Because like Fire got well, before DLC even happened, Cinderace got Protein, so that helped out a lot. Bug got like a bunch of good Pokemon with Sizor and Heracross, so now it can completely demolish Ice if it wanted to. Dark got Urshifu, so that just goes without saying. Ghost has had a decent matchup against Ice. Fairy had Hatterene with Mystical Fire. Electric can just literally run over the type whenever it wants to. Grass, obviously it doesn't do well against Grass, but like you can see, like I literally just named like the types that are on this list and how they all literally demolish this type right now, and it's just not that good. It's not very decent. It can still put in work. Don't get me wrong. Aurora Veil is still very strong. Sandslash Alola is kind of not good, but it does have a better version with a not a better version, but there's better physical attacker in Darmanitan that can obviously put in work still. Also, still has Weavile, who is also a very consistently good Pokemon. Got the good special attackers with Kyurem and such. Also, this type was also really, really hurt by the Kyurem Black ban, because now without Kyurem Black, it just cannot run screens Kyurem Black and just run over types completely if they're unprepared. And it's really unfortunate because that actually really hurt the type more than I think the DLC did. And I think because of that, Ice is just it's just not that good right now. It might actually get worse as the DLC goes on, because it doesn't really have that many Pokemon that haven't come back yet. Like, I'm pretty sure Ice has almost everything it had last gen. Yeah, I'm pretty sure it has almost everything it had last gen. So there's really like, actually, let me look at what he had last gen, because now I'm actually genuinely curious. Because besides like the lack of Z moves, I don't really think there's much Ice is missing. Where are they? Oh yeah, it's right here. But yeah, ignore the Mega Glalie teams. But like yeah, literally look at this. There's no Kyurem Black anymore, so it doesn't like have that mon anymore, and because it doesn't have it, it just literally suffers as a result. But yeah, it just doesn't have any other good Pokemon that can come in the next generation. Like, there's no other Pokemon it can get. There's no other TMs it can get. There's no Z moves aren't coming back. So like, it's literally just stuck. Like, it's just not going to get better right now. And I feel like back before the Kyurem Black ban, Ice was at its best. But now it's not that good. I mean, heavy duty boots does help a lot, but it can only do so much. It can only do so much to help Ice out, and it does still help it out quite a bit, but it's just not enough to really bring it out of the rut that it's in right now. It gets completely washed by other offensive types like water, rock, psychic, electric, for example. It just isn't that good. It really isn't that good, and I feel like people will begin to figure that out more and more as they play with the type more. I feel like the pro players have already figured it out that this type is kind of bad right now, but I definitely don't think it's as bad as flying or ground, because it still can put in work. But it's just completely underwhelming right now. Darmanitan Galar is really what's keeping this type alive at the moment. If it wasn't for that Pokemon, I'd say it's probably one of the worst types in the game. Now we got Normal. Normal's a pretty beat rank type. I was originally going to rate it C, but then after using it a lot more, I found that this type actually does do quite a significant amount of work, and I feel like it's kind of underplayed at the moment, because it has the Teleport EV Light Core, it has Scarf and Deity, which can just completely Shrek teams. You also got a lot of dangerous threats with Diggersby, not Helios, but Beware. It's kind of got the bug syndrome going on where it has Pokemon that just completely threaten entire teams. Like Beware completely threatens Steel, Rock, and opposing Normal. You've got Heliolisk that can help destroy water, for example. Uh, you also got Diggersby, who's just good in general. You got Indeedee, who can just almost completely sweeps poison with like no effort. It's kind of ridiculous, and normal does normal definitely feels good, especially with the teleport Evio core. But I feel like the reason it's not picked more is because it lacks hazard removal. It still doesn't have very good hazard removal. Like Raptor not coming back is probably the biggest thing that's going to hold this type back. Because Mega Lopunny being gone, that hurts a lot. Don't get me wrong, but I feel like it's arguably worse when it doesn't have hazard removal. Because like a lot of other Pokemon got their Megas taken away, and that actually helped in the benefit of normal. Because think about it, Mega Gallade got taken away, and Gallade just isn't as good on certain types. So not even Psychic is running it commonly. Victini is gone. Let's see, a lot of other fighting type Megas were also just taken away. So normal really benefited from Megas being gone because it just had a lot of good, solid normal Pokemon. No pun intended, but it's pretty solid, honestly. And I feel like there's not really much else I have to say. It's just pretty solid. I think the reason it's not used more is because of the inconsistencies and it getting run over by certain types. Some better offensive types, obviously, and Urshifu like is a huge threat in the metagame, and normal doesn't really have a lot of good answers to that besides using Ditto, and that's not reliable. So I can understand why it's not used more, but I definitely don't think it's bad. It's not a bad type at all. Definitely we're on the same level as these types here. So yeah, without further ado, let's go to Poison. Poison is in an interesting spot. If I can make a tier between B and C, I would definitely put Poison in that tier because it is the most awkward type in the entire metagame. So I'll put it in C for now because I feel like B is getting a little crowded, but this is literally the closest to B that it can be. Like, it is really, really close to being a B tier type. Like, it is extraordinarily close. You know, I'll just put it in B for the hell of it. But like, this is probably like the lowest of B, but like the highest of C. It is like a really, really awkward type. So you have Salazzle, which completely destroys balance thanks to Substitute Toxic, and then you have really good defensive Pokemon in Moongus, Toxapex, and all that. And you also got really solid offensive Pokemon in Gengar and such. I actually forgot the other one, but Drapion, I'm pretty sure is also a good Pokemon on that type. But yeah, you have these really decent Pokemon. I also forgot about Vileplume, who literally makes sure that you don't never get swept by a ground team. You also got other scary Pokemon like Toxtricity, obviously, but in general, Poison is just obscenely good. It's obscenely good in certain matchups. It's kind of like how it was last gen, though, where it's like it doesn't really have a ton of offensive presence, but it's still relatively scary. And because of how scary Salazzle is, the threat of running into Poison with Salazzle is like really scary for any balance team. So it kind of just makes offense look that much more appealing if a user is known to bring Poison. Well, the thing is, it does have some solutions to offense too, just not like a lot. I feel like the main thing that holds Poison back right now is the lack of Muckalola, because Drapion is alright, but it's not that good compared to that mon. Especially as a Psychic immunity, I feel like it's just not as good. And Pursuit being gone also really, really hurts this type. Because I feel like if Pursuit was still in the game, it might be a little bit better, because I think Drapion got it. Feel free to quote me about it wrong, but it wouldn't make a difference anyway, because Drapion is just not that good. and it would get easily worn down throughout the entirety of the game. So I feel like poison definitely is a type you should be a little worried about. Like, keep that in the back of your mind. Definitely a type you shouldn't forget about. Like, don't forget about this type, because if you try to make balance and not account for Salazzle, you will lose. Especially if you try to make like a water stall team and it doesn't have any answer or any counterplay for Salazzle, you will literally lose at team preview. Like, it's really, really threatening, and you should not forget about it. It has good positive matchups too against like a lot of types, because any type that basically isn't steel, and steel automatically loses to poison anyway, because Salazzle literally destroys the entire type. Like, even with Heatran, like, steel would just lose to Salazzle. Like, it's just a matter of fact. Let's see. Salazzle also is. I wouldn't say Salazzle's like the main thing that defines poison, because what defines poison is its really good defensive core, and its ability to just completely stall out and wall out types, like Dragon, Dark, Bug. It just completely walls out those types. And being able to do that consistently is really good. But I feel like its main weakness is a couple of its mons don't have like Regenerator. There's no Regenerator core per se. And Slowbro Galar, you would think would help out with that, but Slowbro's garbage on poison. It's not that good. It really isn't that good. I wouldn't say it's like garbage, but it's not that good compared to some of the other Pokemon on the type. And I feel like if you wanted to have a Regenerator core, just do Amoonguss and Toxapex, because Amoonguss isn't as good on poison as it is on grass, but it's well, actually no, I think I got that flip-flopped. I think it's better on poison than it is on grass, but Amoonguss is still pretty weird because it doesn't have strength set, and it doesn't constantly threaten the offensive Pokemon like Excadrill for clicking Iron Head with effect spores. So Vileplume and Amoonguss are kind of fighting for a spot right now, and I don't really think it's been decided which one is better yet, but regardless of which one it is, both of them still get worn down pretty easily. And Amoonguss is way too passive. Vileplume is just not that. It gets worn down really easily, especially with Stealth Rock and spikes and such. And Galarian Weezing is also pretty good, but it makes the type extremely passive because of how it's the one user defog. Because offensively, it's pretty decent. It has alright coverage, but I feel like not having Crobat to like be an offensive threat and an offensive defogger just kind of hurts the type a little bit, and also the lack of pivoting really doesn't help this type at all. So I feel like for those reasons, Poison's definitely like lowest of B, highest of C. I'll leave it in B rank for now though, just to make it look good. And now we have Psychic. Instant A tier. Actually, no. Yeah, definitely S tier. Psychic is one of the best types in the game right now. Literally, Indeedee, Psychic Terrain, Alakazam. Do I need to say more? Like, it's just crazy that Expanding Force is a move. Like, imagine an 80 base power Psychic move that now gets boosted in Psychic Terrain, but not because of Psychic Terrain, just because Psychic Terrain is present. So you basically get a 120 base power move when you're in Psychic Terrain. And Terrain Extender is still legal, by the way. Although Terrain Extender Indeedee isn't really that good as like Terrain Extender Pincurchin for Electric, for example, you're still going to use obscene amounts of Indeedee in Psychic. Like, it's ridiculous what this mod can enable you to do. And if you literally sack it or even like switch it out for something, then one of your other Pokemon comes in and it's just like, ugh, nasty. Also, Indeedee female can also potentially see use because of it being more defensive. It's setting Psychic Terrain and being able to like Healing Wish out, guarantee a heal, especially with Slowbro and such. Oh yeah, and let's not even begin to mention that Slowbro is also back and has Teleport Regenerator now, which allows for bounce teams to actually work properly. And that is one of the main reasons. That's literally the main reason why Psychic is one of the top types right now. Slowbro Psychic. You got teleport shenanigans with Slowbro. You got the Psychic terrain with Indeedee. Like all that and Pokemon like Hatterene just make this type one of the most scariest types in the metagame. It's obviously still got weaknesses. Like every type has weaknesses. It does get offensively pressured by terrain types and weather, obviously. Uh, it's still pretty weak to electric if it gets terrain up. It's in terrain wars, but it also gets weakened by uh, types like ground. It's also weak to fire, for example, because fire just literally keeps clicking fire moves against it. It's very weak to offensive types, so it's not necessarily uh, that decent. All right. Anyway, rock. Rock is definitely decent. Hold on, I'll be right back. Sorry about that. Anyway, we will now be discussing about rock. Rock is pretty much one of the worst types in the metagame. Definitely, I've used it quite a bit though, and while I don't feel like it's as bad, I definitely feel like it's at the same ranking as flying and ground. And my reasoning is because it definitely still has the matchups where it can excel, but it's just not as consistent as it should be. It can beat normal, it can beat ice, it can beat fighting, it can beat pretty much any type in the metagame if you really, really try, but you have to try super, super hard, and you have to play absurdly well in order to do it. And I think for those reasons, it's definitely one of the hardest types to win within this metagame. And definitely one of the main reasons why I don't think it's the best. I heard a lot of people call it the most a rather unviable type, but I just don't think that's true. It's definitely viable. It can literally win. It's just that it's very hard to do so, and you have to try really, really hard. Just like you do have to try really hard with flying and ground. Even though those two have Pokemon that carry it, Rock also kind of has Pokemon that carry it, like Shuckle and Lycanroc, Tyranitar. It has mons that carry it, but it still suffers a lot in terms of viability because of Pokemon like Scizor, fighting types like Urshifu. Like, it doesn't really help that it also doesn't have water immunity right now, and Tyranitar is not running a very defensive set at the moment, so it's very hard for this type to succeed, but it can succeed, and it will succeed. And that's basically all I had to say about Rock. It's it's not decent. It's pretty bad, but it's still usable. You can still win with this type. It's just going to be very hard in a general sense. Steel. Steel isn't one of the best types in the game right now because you still have your weakness to fire, which is very, very exploitable now for a lot of other types. Because Ghost, Fairy, and Fire all have fire spamming users. Same with Dragon and Dark. Um, but yeah, it does suffer a little bit with its fire weakness, but it also has its fighting weakness, and Urshifu is kind of a big problem for it, thanks to it being able to spam close combat, and especially the dark version of Urshifu is like, ugh, just completely eviscerates Steel. Like, there's nothing Steel can do about that mon at all, especially since it ignores Protect, so Aegislash can't even scout it. But yeah, Steel is in a pretty okay spot. It's definitely still a really solid type, obviously, because it has some of the best Pokemon in the game, like Corviknight, Excadrill. I got Skarmory recently. Also has Ferrothorn, which is still a really, really solid mon. It's not really using Scizor that much right now, but it still has Bisharp, who's never been better. And honestly, the type is still really solid. It can still do a lot of work, and it still has some variety to it. but I definitely feel like it's definitely still one of the most solid types in the metagame. Definitely a top threat you should be worried about. And yeah, it's just really solid. I can't really say much more about it. It's just really, really solid. And lastly, we have water. Water, some people say it's the best type in the game right now. I don't really believe that because it definitely still has weaknesses. Water is definitely, without a doubt, though, one of the most threatening types in the game. I cannot deny that. Um, Water has Urshifu, Rapid Jab form, which can, in rain, can completely dismantle certain teams that aren't prepared for it. Like Bug has no answers to it. Ice has basically no answers to it. Uh, Fighting has no answers to it. Poison has Actually, Poison does have kind of an answer to it, but it might get beaten by a coverage move. Normal has no answers to it. Ghost has basically no answers to it, but it has faster Pokemon. Fairy has no answers to it. Electric has offensive pressure. And yeah, for the most part, most of the types in the metagame just don't have answers to that ridiculousness. But then again, the people who are also whining about that also probably get swept by Kingdrow's Hydro Pumps and Seismitoad's Hydro Pumps, Barraskewda's Flip Turn. The entire type is just completely overwhelming right now. Like, it's not just Urshifu. Urshifu definitely doesn't help, but even if you got rid of that mon, you would still have the problems that Rain would just bring because Kingdra is back, and it is just really, really rough to deal with a Pokemon that now no longer gets walled by grass types. Well, I mean, it didn't get walled by grass types before, thanks to Ice Beam, but like Hurricane helps it so much with dealing with certain Pokemon. So it definitely, it's definitely way better than it used to be before. And yeah, it's just Rain in general. Um, Balance is also still really good, and Stall is also an actual viable archetype now. It's been used twice in a MPL so far. Just to show you that I'm not lying, let me go look up Leylorelai's game. Wherever it is, let me see. Yeah, here it is. But yeah, and Leylorelai literally wins this game, by the way. But yeah, this archetype is literally viable. There's nothing unviable about this type, about this archetype right now. Because you can run, Lapras is fine for freeze dry, but you can still run Azumarill to help deal with your grass weakness. And you can still use Slowbro for pivoting and all that. So it is very much a viable type. It's very, very much a viable type right now, and I feel like you should definitely, definitely, without a shadow of doubt in my mind, be prepared for this type, because if you try to ignore water, you will lose to it, and there is nothing you can do about it. It's just the type you have to keep in mind while building your teams, and although there are some problematic Pokemon on it, I don't feel like it's completely impossible to deal with. It's not the best type in the game. It's definitely one of the best, but it's not the best without a shadow of a doubt. Because it does have exploitable weaknesses in priority. Rain obviously still has its weaknesses in being weak to, well, it used to be being weak to steel types, but now that's not that much of a problem. But you had Keldeo anyway, so that's not really relevant. You also have poison types being a problem. Faster terrain teams also can actually beat water pretty well, actually. Um, yeah, there's definitely some counterplay to it. Not a ton, but there's some. And opposing weather also is very annoying, but I feel like water will still be grounded fire regardless of what you do. So yeah. But definitely water still has its weaknesses, because if you kill the rain setter and try to get offensive momentum off of, and play aggressively against the type, it's very possible for you to win with most types. But because that's why you don't see like rainwater completely dominating MPL right now. It's because it definitely still has counterplay. It might completely destroy on the latter because it's very brain dead and easy to use, like most offense is. But in high level play like MPL, you're not going to see it as much because it's very easy to beat, it's very easy to build around, and it's just not as problematic. So, without further ado, that will be the end of my tier list. If you skipped all the way here to this point because you didn't want to look at anything, please don't. Please look at the rest of the video so you can see my explanations for everything. And without further ado, I hope you guys enjoyed this tier list. If you want to see more tier list content and Pokemon Sword and Shield Monotype related content, feel free to subscribe to me and do whatever you will. So without further ado, goodbye and have a great day.